episode of the Deals for Dentists podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Block. And through these podcast episodes, I'll be interviewing dental professionals and companies, and I aim to inspire, entertain, and educate you on the best tools and technologies out there. My goal is to help make your practice and career more profitable, efficient, and most importantly, more enjoyable. And also be sure to check out my latest book, Stress-Free Dental Implants, Re-Energize Your Career with Implants, and also my first book, The Stress-Free Dentist, Overcome Burnout and Start Loving Dentistry Again. And you can check those out on thestressfreedentist.com. But today we are joined by a special guest, Ross Brannan. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, glad to be here.
Now, Ross Brannan is a financial advisor, a finance expert you can put your complete trust on, and have no burden of worrying about achieving your financial dreams and goals. He has specialized approaches to financial planning for dental professionals for issues and challenges working on personal and business wealth. And you can schedule your complimentary financial flossing session with him to see how you may care for your financial needs and create a bright future for yourself and your family. Hey, Ross, where are you zooming in from today?
I'm in Tallahassee, Florida, the state capital of Florida, where it's always hot and humid.
Yeah, I'm up in Boston, and it's probably just as hot and humid this past week. We've been going through a heat wave where it's in the high 90s. So we're probably not that far off from temperature. But Ross, I just wanted to hear all about kind of your story and how you got into helping dentists.
You know, it's funny. I had years ago when I started in this career, I had a friend who was an orthodontist who lived 2.5 hours west of me, and I started working with him. And he then introduced me to a friend of his. And that friend of his introduced me to several friends of his. And then it snowballed from there. And next thing I knew, a majority of my practice was dentist. And I was like, I kind of like working with dentists because they are small business owners. And there's a lot of planning opportunities and ways you can help them. And so I just started focusing on dentists from there.
And do you find dentists unique? Because like you mentioned, we're small business owners, but we come out with zero business training, and we can actually have a successful business right out of the gates.
The physicians and dentists are always compared, and the majority of physicians today are W-2 employees, typically employees of a hospital. The majority of dentists are entrepreneurs who own their own practice. A majority of physicians are focused on the public service loan forgiveness program with all their student loans, and very few dentists are because they're starting their own practice. And I would rather be a dentist than a physician 100 times. Like you said, you're a small business owner, you're an entrepreneur with an unlimited opportunity to create flexibility in your schedule, to create income. And it's a phenomenal opportunity. But to your point, nobody learns anything about business or money in dental school. It's all clinical things. And so there are a lot of challenges. And I find that dentists tend to be fairly coachable versus other groups of people.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like I came out of school with just the minimal clinical skills, and I didn't know how to talk to patients. I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't know HR, marketing, or anything about taking care of my finances. What would you say is really the first step for a dentist to get a control of their finances? Do you typically start with like a consultation?
Well, I typically start with a conversation to figure out where they're at. In my experience with dentists, none of them have ever, or very few of them have actually had, an advisor who looks at everything. The typical dentist, in my experience, has somebody they bought disability insurance from in residency or at the end of dental school or residency. They have somebody they bought life insurance from to satisfy a bank loan. And they have somebody that implemented more than likely a simple IRA for their practice. That is typically what I see. They've never had anyone talk to them about the power of saving. They've never had anyone talk to you about how investing works. They've never had anyone talking about all the protection components, all the different types of insurances, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And they've never had anyone talk to them about, I think I said investing, but I didn't say investing. And and retirement planning. So when you look at things from a macro perspective and like tie it all in, they typically have never seen somebody do that or work with someone who's done that.
You're actually very right that, we go through school, we take, all the classes, the prerequisite classes we need to apply to dental school. We take the DATs, then we get into dental school, and everything is kind of planned and laid out for us. But then when you get out of school, there's no plan. I mean, you're in the real world, and so having someone like what you're doing, kind of looking at the big picture and providing a plan. And I think doing this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the earlier the better, is really powerful.
It is. And then if you're successful and you're making a lot of money, the tax man's coming to visit. And then you've got to make sure you're working with the right professionals to mitigate your taxes as much as you can legally. Now, I'm not a tax professional, I'm not a CPA. I do know a fair amount, but I have relationships with CPAs who do tax planning and help mitigate their clients' tax burden. You mentioned something else, like no one teaches you how to talk to a patient. If you're going to sell a very expensive case, you have to know how to talk to a patient. And you can't just, fumble around and do that typically. So it's important to have relationships with people all across the industry in different genres. And that's one of the things that I pride myself on. So I may not be an expert in one of your dental issues if it's non-finance, but I probably know someone who could help out.
Now, actually, what is your background? Financial planning, and what exactly is the title of your role? Is it a financial planner, a financial analyst?
So I've been doing this. I went to school in Tallahassee, Florida. I played college football at Florida State back in the late 90s. Had an injury ended my career. And then I kind of fell into real estate, really had fun in real estate, enjoyed that. And then I kind of got burned out in real estate. Luckily, it was before everything went down the tubes back about 15 years ago. And then I was a client of a firm, and the firm says, hey, you're kind of financially wired. Why don't you come work here? So I started working there, and that's how I did that. And so what I do is I'm a financial advisor by title, but what I do is financial planning work. There's a lot of financial advisors who only work in one segment or one silo of our industry. They might only work in the investment side. They might only work in the insurance side. They might only work in the retirement planning side. And what I have found is when you do all of that together, because it's all linked and they all kind of ebb and flow together. One thing affects the other thing. When you do that together, in my opinion, you actually are doing financial planning. So when I work with someone, we're sitting here starting out talking about things as boring as your auto insurance liability limits. And then we'll get into things as complex as estate planning, as well as retirement planning and Social Security benefits and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, it just sounds like to do this as early as possible in your career, or if you're married, to get your spouse involved in the conversation as well.
Or if you're older before it's too late.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, typically the older you are, you've got more moving parts, and you got more, life gets busy. And so if you're 28 years old, that's a lot easier to set the foundation than it is to, if you're 45 years old, to kind of restructure the foundation.
So it's just going through, you have a ton of advisor services that you provide, which it sounds like you're creating this plan, creating this, full kind of umbrella to help these dentists, tax planning, cash flow analysis. Can you explain what cash flow analysis is?
So when I ask clients, what does it cost them to live every month? Something I call their monthly burn rate. 9 out of 10 people cannot tell me how much it costs themselves to live. And I don't know if it's always been that way, but it's been that way ever since I've since I've been doing this. And what's funny is that let's suppose someone makes $300,000 a year. That's $25,000 a month. Let's suppose their net after-tax income is $20,000. I'll ask them, I'll say, oh, how much does it cost you to live? And they'll say, oh, it's 12 grand. I'm like, oh, great, you're saving $8,000 a month. They'll be like, no, you have $96,000 in the bank from saving last year, right? And they're like, no, because their guess is merely a guess. They have no idea. And so expenses rise to meet income. And it's very important that we create a cash flow system that allows us to save in a systematic way and deploy capital to places where it will grow. And I find this is probably one of the most powerful things that I do for clients because no one's doing it. I can mathematically show how the rate of savings is more important than the rate of return on investments, but investments are sexier than savings. And so no one wants to talk about it, but when we actually structure cash flow the right way, it can help someone really turn the Titanic of their finances around and have them going the right way. And I've just seen tremendous success doing it.
Yeah, if you picture your typical dentist that's coming out nowadays with $400,000 in debt, and then they want to potentially open up a practice after a year or two, then get married, then buy a house. I mean, we're talking significant amount of debt.
Live the dentist lifestyle. We're gonna have 2 Teslas and make sure we go to Vail 3 times a year. So, which, hey, I don't care. Go to Vail 3 times a year. Go buy 2 Teslas. It doesn't matter to me, as long as you're saving first.
Now, is saving? Does this involve just being really, I would say, tight with your spending? Find out what's important to you. Factor in maybe a vacation or two. Do you get into all that with the dentist?
So I might call that what you're describing is I'm going to call that scarcity budgeting. I don't think what I call spreadsheet budgeting, I don't think it works unless you're an engineer. So if you're an engineer, maybe it does work. But quite frankly, I don't care what you spend your money on as long as you save enough. And typically, if you're doing pretty well, there's likely enough money to be saved and do what you want. But if all your money goes into a checking account, it's going to get spent. I speak from experience myself. And so we have to have an idea, just like you have an idea, you have a bookkeeper more than likely for your practice, you look at the books, we need to have something quasi similar for our cash flow personally. And I'm not trying to get as granular as that by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just restructuring cash flow where it changes the way cash flow operates. And the success I've seen has been nothing short of fantastic.
Now, you asked dentists about what their monthly burn rate is or expenses, and a lot of them just didn't know. What about goals? Do you try to get into what the dentist's goals are? What are their dreams? What are their long-term, short-term goals? And in doing that, do you find that a lot of dentists just don't know what their goals are?
Well, a lot of people in general don't know what their goals are, but we absolutely ask about them and talk about them because you might be 35 years old and want to stop practicing by the time you're 50. Well, if that's what you want, then that's going to require certain things today that if you're trying to work till you're 70, you don't have to do those things. So if you're a retire early person, that's fantastic. But let's talk about what that looks like. And are you willing to make the sacrifices to do that? If you are, great. If you're not, then we might need to recalibrate what your goals are. Because we want to be realistic about these. I don't want to be broke and retire with $1 million next year, making $50,000 a year. That doesn't work. That math doesn't work.
Now, how does it work with retirement planning? Is this something that we should start as soon as we get out of school and start making a paycheck? Is something you should really start doing as soon as possible, or is it case by case?
Well, it's funny. I had a resident sit in my office, a guy who just graduated from residency. He was not a dentist. He was a physician. This was many years ago. And he sat in my office and he wanted to talk about retirement planning. And I said to him, you're already talking about quitting your job before you even started. And so we should always be saving money. And there are certain retirement plans that make sense. There are certain retirement plans that may not make sense. But saving for retirement is not just a retirement plan. You know, if I've got a bucket of money over here, that very well could be used in retirement. And retirement means different things to different people. And likely a person's opinion on retirement will evolve as they age. And so I like to say, if you're going to retire, what are you going to retire to? Because there's only so much golf you can play. I sure as heck hope you're not going to watch the news all day, because you'll jump off a cliff and want to, if you do. So saving is good. Retirement saving, sure, we can earmark some of that money for retirement, but I don't necessarily want to put all my money in retirement accounts because there's limitations on how much I can put in there. And some of them have tax consequences that may not work out for your situation.
Now let's go to investments and guidance for investments. Do you find that some people are just a lot more aggressive than others? Others just are hesitant to invest. What's your experience there?
In my experience, it's most people have never had someone walk them through how the stock market works. They've never been explained what specifically a stock is, what specifically a bond is, how do they historically work, what is the purpose of investing. You know, the reality is inflation is eating our dollars up. It's a big topic now, but even if it wasn't right now, over a 20-year period, a 3% inflation rate will reduce your purchasing power by 40%. So we have to invest because not investing is taking risk. So the question is, how do we invest? What is the purpose of investing? And one of my jobs is to make sure that a client can emotionally manage the ups and downs. A market cannot go up without going down. So the stock market goes up over the long haul, but there's lots of zigs and zags in between. And that volatility, typically human beings are not designed to manage that well. We're emotional creatures, and emotions don't do very well with investing. Which one of the reasons Warren Buffett's so good is he's fairly emotional. If you've read unemotional rather, if you've read much about him.
Yeah, it's also there's so much that goes into investing that you don't want to just wing it.
Right.
Having proper guidance is so important. I think sometimes dentists, their practice is doing well, they have some extra money lying around, and then they just wing it and they can get into trouble. So having proper guidance with someone like Ross is so important. Now, talk to me about life insurance. Let's just say, I'm married, I have kids, versus someone who is single. How do you approach life insurance?
I would submit that life insurance is probably the most misunderstood financial vehicles in our country today. And there's a lot of people who take advantage of that, quite frankly. What I find interesting is, we typically insure our cars and our homes for their full value. But when it comes to our lives, we typically don't insure ourselves for the full potential. Which the reality is, insurance is to replace what was lost. So life insurance is to replace a lost income. For example, if I died, my life insurance is there to replace my income from my spouse and kids, my wife and kids. And most people are woefully underinsured from that perspective. And so having a conversation about the appropriate amount of coverage, I typically find when I have that conversation with people, it's the first time that conversation's ever been had. And some people were like, well, gosh, I should have a lot more. And some people are like, I'm fine where I'm at. And that's fine as long as the conversation has been had and you can make an educated decision. Now, there's obviously different types of insurance, and that becomes a much more complex conversation. And I can speak at length about that to someone one-on-one if those conversations come up.
It just sounds like all of these conversations are so, customized and so different from dentist to dentist. Everyone's different. We all come from different backgrounds. We live in different situations, different ages, different cultures. But
you said something really important. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You said something really important. Is everyone's different. So I really have a strong, I vehemently disagree with it when someone makes a broad brush stroke. So for example, I'm married and I have 5 kids. My situation is different than a lot of people's situation. So you can't say that the guy who's single should do the same thing as me, or the guy who's married and with 1 newborn child should do the same thing as me, who's married and has 5 kids. So every situation is custom, and so the recommendations have to be custom for every situation.
Now, how do you get through to let's say we go back in time, we're talking to a 29-year-old Eric Block. He's single, he just got out of dental school, he's just finally making a paycheck, single. How do you get through to someone of that age to now a 47-year-old Eric Block? He has 2 kids, a house, a wife, a practice. These are 2 very different Eric Blocks.
Well,
is that, go ahead.
It's a good question. And 29-year Eric Block typically is a challenging person to work with. He's still got a little of a know-it-all on him. And what you find typically is once you have a kid, all of a sudden you look around and you realize, well, crap, I got to get my act together. And most people, in my experience, are not ready to have these conversations until they have a child. If they're married and they're older, like 35 or 40, they're like, yeah, we need to have these conversations, but they don't have kids. But if you're in your 20s, you're typically not having these conversations until you have a child. Now, some people do, and kudos to them, but a lot of people don't.
Now, one of my recommendations for dentists is to have these very niche specialists working for you. I have a dental specific lawyer, I have a dental specific accountant, but to also have a someone that understands dentists, a financial planner like Ross that, works with dentists. He understands what dentists are going through, the complexities of the practice. I just think it's so important to not just randomly select any financial planner. Ross, what kind of advice would you give? Let's say someone's just coming out of dental school, a young dental professional. What kind of advice would you give to them?
Well, I would say make sure you're organized financially, because you're probably not, even though you don't have as much going on as an older dentist. But I would say start saving money. As much as you're going to be told to save for retirement, as much as you're going to be told to pay down your debt, I would start saving money, because the money you put in your retirement account is illiquid. The money you take to pay off your debt, you can't get back. And there'll be time to do both of those. But savings gives you options. If you're sitting on a wad of cash and you're going to open your own practice, the bank likes it. That's a little bit better look in the eyes of the bank. But if you're having to borrow money from mom or dad or mother-in-law and father-in-law just to do some sort of transaction, that's not the best. Liquidity gives you options. And I find that it's really important to have some cash on hand.
Oh man, that's great advice. Ross Brannon, financial advisor. Again, go to Deals for Dentists, get your complimentary financial flossing session. I love that name, and I had the pleasure of being on your podcast, which is also called Financial Flossing, correct?
That's correct.
So go to Deals for Dentists, check out Ross. Otherwise, Ross, how do we find out more about you?
Well, I'll be pretty transparent. I kind of live on the phone. I'll give my cell phone number out. Someone can call me or text me right away or whenever they want. And that doesn't bother me a bit. My phone number is 850-566-7999, 850-566-7999. You could also go to rossbrannon.com, ROSSBRANNON.com. You can schedule a meeting with me there, or you could email me, Ross, ROSS_Brannon, BRANNON, at YOURSWS. That's Ross_Brannon at yoursws.com.
And is there a link to the podcast there as well?
There's not a link to the pod. The podcast is on the website. It's not in my email, but the podcast is on the website. And so you can check out financial flossing on there. Of course, you want to go straight to the episode with Dr. Eric Block, the best episode ever recorded. But there's a lot of other information in there that you'll likely find interesting.
All right, my man, Ross, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
As always, I hope everyone finds this episode interesting and valuable. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the Deals for Dentists podcast on your favorite podcast platform and our weekly newsletter so you don't miss any of our upcoming shows. And if you're a dental company and interested in becoming a partner and want us to help you reach over 30,000 dentists nationwide, please email info@dealsfordentists.com.